The Library of Silent Echoes, a legacy of dust and lost voices. Good evening, lovers of the unusual and the forgotten. Today, I will not take you to a town submerged in fantasy, but to a much more concrete place that is no less enigmatic, a library. Not the modern, bright library full of screens that we know, but one of those old libraries that smells of aged paper, worn leather, and the whispers of countless stories. This is the story of the Crossroads Library and its last custodian, a man named Matías. Matías wasn't a librarian by vocation, but by inheritance. The Crossroads Library had belonged to his family for generations, a lineage of eccentric scholars and collectors of curiosities. His grandfather, a diminutive man with thick glasses and a beard that reached his waist, had been the last to care for it before Matías. A young man in his 20s, more interested in rock music and the girls in town, was forced to assume the responsibility after his predecessor's sudden death. The library was not in a town, but at a rural crossroads, hence its name. It was a building of dark stone and ogival windows, covered in ivy, that seemed to have sprouted from the earth itself. Inside, it was a labyrinth of solid wooden shelves that rose to the ceiling, filled with dusty volumes. The air was dense, heavy, imbued with that unique smell that only old libraries possess. There were books on history, philosophy, the occult, poetry in dead languages, maps of non-existent worlds, and leather-bound tomes that, at a glance, seemed older than time itself. Matías, at first, hated the library. He considered it a prison, a mausoleum of dead ideas that separated him from the vibrant life he longed for. He spent his days yawning, constantly sweeping up the accumulating dust, and occasionally shooing away the spiders weaving their webs in the corners. His only company was the silence, a silence so profound that sometimes he thought he could hear the beats of his own heart echoing in the vast rooms. However, as the months passed, something began to change. The silence of the library stopped being oppressive and became communicative. Matías began to perceive it not as an absence of sound, but as a presence, a subtle vibration that emanated from the books themselves. At first, they were just indistinct whispers, like the murmur of the wind among dry leaves. But little by little, those whispers began to take shape. One afternoon, while reorganizing a section of alchemy treatises, Matías heard a clear, crystalline laugh coming from a nearby shelf. He turned sharply, expecting to find someone, but there was no one. The sound repeated, and Matías realized it was coming from an old fairy tale book, one of those volumes illustrated with intricate engravings. He hesitated, then reached out and opened it. The laughter intensified, filling the room with contagious joy. Matías turned the pages, and on each one, in each drawing of princesses and dragons, of ogres and fairy godmothers, he felt the vibration of that childlike laughter. From that day on, Matías discovered the secret of the Crossroads Library. The books not only contained stories, but also held the emotional echoes of their readers. Whenever someone read a book with passion, with joy, with sadness, with wonder, a part of that emotion became impregnated in its pages, trapped in time like an invisible perfume. The library was, in reality, a gigantic archive of feelings, a silent chorus of past voices. Matías began to spend his days not reading, but listening. He would sit in a worn leather chair in the center of the main room and close his eyes. The whispers would become a whirlwind of emotions. The astonishment of a child discovering a new universe in an astronomy book. The melancholy of an old man reading a lost love letter. The fury of a revolutionary devouring a manifesto. The fear of a young woman with a horror novel. He could hear the laments of lovers, the exclamations of explorers, the oaths of heroes, and the prayers of saints. Each book was a portal to a human experience, and Matías became the listener of them all. He learned more about the human condition in those months than in his entire life before. The lives of thousands of people, with their joys and sorrows, their triumphs and failures, unfolded before him in a silent and overwhelming concert. There was one book, however, that intrigued him more than any other. It was an ancient tome with no visible title, bound in a hide that looked like parchment. It was hidden in the darkest, dustiest section of the library, almost as if it did not want to be found. Each time Matías approached it, he felt a strange mixture of anticipation and fear. The book did not emanate a singular emotion, but a cacophony of voices, all speaking at once, overlapping, creating an incomprehensible discord. One day, overcoming his apprehension, Matías took the book. As he opened it, the silence of the library was broken. It was not a whisper, nor a laugh, but a scream. A heart-wrenching scream, full of pain and despair, that seemed to spring from the depths of the earth itself. Matías dropped the book and covered his ears, trembling. The scream was so powerful that he felt it was tearing his soul from his body. When the echo faded, Matías risked looking at the book again. It was open to a dense page of text in a language he did not know, accompanied by an engraving of a man in agony. He felt a shiver run down his spine. This book did not contain the echo of a reader, but the echo of the author himself, the pure manifestation of the suffering of the one who had written it. It was a scream frozen in time, an open wound on the pages. From that day on, Matías understood that the Crossroads Library was not just an archive of emotions, but a place where the souls of those who had interacted deeply with the books left an indelible imprint. The authors who poured their lives into their works, the readers who completely lost themselves in a story, all of them left a fragment of themselves behind. Matías's life changed completely. He no longer felt the need to escape. The library had become his universe, and he, its guardian, the silent listener of the voices of the past. He dedicated himself to organizing the books, not by subject, but by the intensity of their emotional echo. He created sections for joy, for sadness, for wonder, for fear. He could spend hours in the lost loves section, listening to the silent laments of broken hearts, or in adventures, feeling the adrenaline of forgotten heroes. The townspeople, who rarely visited the library, began to notice something different about Matías. His face, once bored, now reflected a deep serenity and a wisdom that did not correspond to his age. His eyes, once empty, shone with an unusual understanding. Sometimes, when someone entered by mistake, they would find him sitting with his eyes closed, a smile or a grimace of sadness on his face, as if he were conversing with invisible ghosts. An old man from the town, an amateur historian, one day dared to ask Matías about the untitled book, the one Matías had found in the dark section. The historian had heard rumors about a cursed tome, written by an insane hermit, that contained the screams of the damned. Matías looked at him with an expression of profound melancholy. "They are not the screams of the damned, sir," Matías said, his voice surprisingly soft. "It is the scream of a man who poured all his suffering into the written word. A part of his soul is trapped in that book, an echo of his pain that endures through time." A skeptical historian asked to see the book. Matías handed it to him, but not without a warning. "Remember, some echoes are too strong for the human heart." The old man, with scientific curiosity, opened the tome. There was no heart-wrenching scream like the one Matías had heard. For the historian, the book was just that, an old book with illegible text. He did not possess Matías's gift. He closed the book with a shrug, disappointed. Matías smiled sadly. "Not everyone can hear the voices, sir. Some of us are destined to be the ears for those who are no longer here." Years passed. Matías grew old in the Crossroads Library, a hermit among books, a custodian of emotions. His hair turned white, his back hunched, but his eyes maintained that unusual shine, that deep understanding of life and death. He became a local legend, the librarian of silent echoes, the man who spoke with the dead through their books. When Matías finally died, they found him in his leather chair, his hand resting on an old book of poetry, There were no screams, no laments. Just a peaceful silence, as if Matías himself had merged with the voices he so loved. The Crossroads Library was left abandoned, its doors sealed by time and oblivion. The few books that were rescued ended up in other libraries, diluted among thousands of other volumes. But it is said that on the most silent nights, if one dares to approach the old building at the crossroads, one can still hear a soft murmur coming from the ruins. A chorus of thousands of voices, laughter, sighs, laments, and exclamations that rise from the dust and the darkness, reminding us that, although bodies die and buildings crumble, the stories and emotions that gave them life can endure forever, trapped in the silent echoes of a forgotten library. And so, my friends, we conclude our journey through the Library of Silent Echoes, a story that invites us to think about the life that permeates every written word and the whispers that await us between the pages of books, waiting to be heard. Until next time, when we will explore another hidden corner of the imagination.